Hey girl, Marissa here. You are listening to the Codependent Dummy podcast. As a young woman, you have been raised, reinforced, and rewarded for putting the needs of others above your own. Now, in your 20s, you're finding yourself exhausted, exasperated, and enveloped in shit relationships, especially the one you have with yourself. Codependency is a way of being where we put the feelings, wants, and needs of others above our own in an unconscious attempt to meet our own feelings, wants, and needs. Sorry to break it to you, sis, but that is not sustainable. This podcast is to help you undo all that so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. Let's get to it. Hey girl, hey. It's me, your girl Marissa. Welcome to the Codependent Dummy podcast, episode 88. And I actually forgot to check. Let me make sure I have the right microphone. Yes, so I don't sound like I'm under the ocean. So welcome, everyone. Today's episode, GRR, how my seething codependent resentment turned into rage. We gon' get real in this episode. I've touched on anger and resentment in the past, in prior episodes. I have had guests on who talked about how and why codependency contributes to the buildup of resentment and anger. And I've gotten emails from listeners like Shauna, shout out to Shauna, who have asked me to discuss anger. So alas, here we are, baby girl. You, me, and anger. Before we dive in, I want to have a check-in with you all. Now let's take a deep breath. And out. One more if you can. You can reach your arms up. Oh, stretch and out. Roll your neck. Let's see. I don't know if I popped my neck today. Oh, yeah, popped it. And you can jump, bounce your shoulders a little bit, shimmy, shake if you can. And take some time to reflect on. Oh, I think I hear my water bottle. It is, it's my water bottle. I don't know if you guys picked that up on the mic. Gotta stay hydrated. So, checking in. How are you doing, my baby girl? Good, bad, all right. How are you feeling, my baby girl? My precious, precious baby girl. Are you feeling calm, anxious, terrified, lonely, sad, down? Are you doing too much for others and not enough for yourself lately? I know that it takes a lot of ovaries to reverse this pattern, but I'm curious if anything comes to mind for one thing you can decline, say no to, or take off your to-do list to practice radical tenderness towards yourself this week. And last question for the check-in. When I have you think of the primary relationship in your life, Primary as in most important, most consuming, most, I say meaningful, it could just mean a lot to you. It might not be meaningful internally, but the primary relationship in your life currently could be a partner, a parent, a child, a friend, a boss. How are you feeling about that relationship? How are you feeling? With my therapy patients and myself too, myself also, there's this inclination to identify, oh, I feel sad about my primary relationship, or I feel distant, or I feel lonely in this relationship. So now I have to talk to them about it, which is true. And also, prior to addressing it, I sincerely encourage you to sit with the feeling or feelings, there may be many, journal about them, meditate on them, be curious about them, feel them before you jump into taking any action. Just focus on the feeling. Right now, today, this week, this month, just focusing on the feelings, okay? I did want to check in on my end, real talk. This week I felt pretty motivated. I've been having organic and spontaneous energy to take care of things that I postpone or procrastinate on. I had some quality time with my baby nephew, Mateo, who is 8 months old now, which is always the best. And I had some big insights, at least 2 big insights in therapy this week. One of them was about the podcast and why, depending on the topic, or really probably on an unconscious level before recording, especially solo casts, but even interviews, I dread recording the episodes. And I engage in these avoidance, self-protection strategies. I'll eat too much. I'll pick my nails. I'll clean. I will productively procrastinate because I can't unproductively procrastinate because the productivity gods would be disapproving of that, and I'm codependent with them. And my therapist was like, why? What do you make of this dread before you record? And I shared about, oh, I'm anxious. And she's like, no, like make it stronger. And I was like, I'm terrified. What terrifies you? And it's like, I'm terrified that I'll look stupid. And I don't know what I'm talking about, even though I'm a licensed therapist. And next year, I've been in the field for 10 years, but never mind that. I'll look stupid. I'm terrified I will sound self-absorbed by droning on and on about myself like I am right now in a solo cast. And I'm terrified I'll be humiliated by losing listeners or being rejected by listeners due to being boring podcaster. And she helped me trace it back to some memories where I felt the same dread. or I felt the same sense that people are bored. People think I'm self absorbed. People think I'm stupid. Right? Memories at school, memories with my family, and yeah, just really identifying with those harsh judgments. Stupid, self-absorbed, and boring. And so talking about them and crying and having these realizations, which I'm familiar with. I know that those are aspects of myself that I've wrestled with, but really realizing them on a deeper level, I did not experience as much dread in writing this episode. I think it's still there recording. Um, but I'm learning to navigate them. Yeah, I don't think becoming aware of something immediately means it no longer has a hold on you. So I'm learning how to navigate them. So I can continue to help you stop playing small and start taking up space. The podcast has done well, numbers wise. I I don't know. I'm grateful and surprised looking at the numbers, hearing from listeners, having the positive experiences I've had thus far. It's episode 88. And yet, I am aware that unless I fundamentally challenge, negate, and transform these beliefs I have about myself, unless I do that, I don't sense it will matter on a deep level how successful the show is. And that's really what I'm working on right now. It's the insight stuff. Because being codependent and just seeking approval, like I'm sure you have, we just know how unfulfilling that pursuit has been. So, yeah, really, really doing the work internally and being curious if and when strong emotions like dread before every episode I record comes up. That's what this is about. So I encourage you to, I guess, also checking in with yourself. Any emotional pattern that you're noticing to bring to therapy this week. Actually was not planning to record this weekend, but due to some technical difficulties with this week's guest, we had to reschedule, and I'm hesitant to talk about anger and the anecdotes I'll be sharing. But what's also helping me, besides therapy and my mission for all of you, is I attended a talk recently between two established female authors. One was talking about her new book and was asked by her colleague who was doing the interviewing about her writing process. And she said, you have to write what you are most afraid of. And she quoted another author, Natalie Goldberg, who wrote, write what disturbs you, what you fear, what you have not been willing to speak about. Be willing to split open. And for reasons I'm conscious and not conscious of, that stuck with me. Write what you are afraid of, Marissa. Write what disturbs you. Write what you fear. Write what you've not been willing to speak about. So with that, let's dive in and split open into the connection between codependency, resentment, and rage. Water too. Hydration. Water break, everyone. The lens we are using for this episode, we're looking through anger, resentment, and codependency via the work of Dr. Harriet Lerner, PhD, from her book, The Dance of Anger. Here it is for everyone listening. Here's the book. This book was published in 1985. I first read it in graduate school in 2013, and it has sold over 1 million copies. It was a New York Times bestseller as well. Dr. Lerner was and is an expert on the psychology of women. Since most codependents, the stereotype of codependents tends to be women, Dr. Lerner is a great resource, and I highly encourage you to read her book. She has this. She also has The Dance of Intimacy and The Dance of Deception. Good stuff. Here is an excerpt from her book to start us off. Dr. Lerner writes, anger is a signal and one worth listening to. Our anger may be a message that we are being hurt, that our rights are being violated, that our needs or wants are not being adequately met, or simply that something is not right. Our anger may tell us that we are not addressing an important emotional issue in our lives, or that too much of ourself, our beliefs, values, desires, or ambitions is being compromised in a relationship. Our anger may be a signal that we are doing more and giving more than we can comfortably do or give. Our anger can motivate us to say no to the ways in which we are defined by others, and yes, to the dictates of our inner self. Thank you, Dr. Lerner. Isn't that a short description of all of our autobiographies as codependents? Let's let that sink in. Saying no to the ways in which we are defined by others, and yes, to the dictates of our inner self. Keeping that in mind, I'm going to share 3 observations Dr. Lerner has about women and anger and how they connect to codependency. Side note, this is one of many episodes where we will touch on codependency, anger, and resentment, since they really are two sides of the same coin. And so much of what we experience as codependents. Okay. First observation. In her book, Dr. Lerner posits that women have long been discouraged from the awareness and forthright expression of anger. How does this relate to codependency? Well, since we prioritize the thoughts, feelings, and needs of others above our own, our codependency it compounds our inability to express our anger. Since we're codependent, we are women, and thus I'm not supposed to feel anything, and I'm only supposed to pay attention to your feelings. Lerner emphasizes how, as women and also as codependents, we are the nurturers, the soothers, the peacemakers. She writes how we please, protect, and placate the world. And we may hold relationships in place as if our lives depend on it. Okay, I'm going to circle back to this main observation later. But yeah, just really, while you're listening, I'm curious what comes up for you as women, as codependent women. How have you been discouraged from the awareness of your own anger and hyper aware, hyper conscious of the anger of others? Oh my God, that is like, yeah, childhood, like home, teachers, angry people, etc. Just I'm so aware. Dr. Lerner's, second observation from Dr. Lerner is that women repress and suppress their anger to stay in place. Culturally, she asks, like, why are angry women so threatening? And wonders, maybe it's because they're not going to stay in place. And on the flip side of that, if we are guilty, depressed, and self-doubting, as many of us codependents are, what happens in our relationships? They stay in place. We don't take action. We don't try to change things. But we actually may take hurtful action towards ourselves and be hyper focused on changing ourselves, right? But nothing outside of us gets changed. And I know that in my own anger, when there was tension in relationships, and I have been taught and reinforced to stay in place and keep things in place, not rock the boat, be a nurturer. How can I consciously, but where do I put this? And I've shared with you guys, like I used to pick my nails like crazy. Now I pick my cuticles. I've moved up. And I used to pick my hair. I believe I've shown that before. Trichotillomania. I used to pick my hair when I was little, right? Like pick. Oh, hurts so good. I was hurting and yet not expressing that. I would overeat, I'd over-exercise, over-drinking, all those things, because I'm repressing and suppressing my anger. At least I'm keeping my relationships in place, but I have nowhere externally to put this rage. Third point from Dr. Lerner, she argues that women learn to fear their anger for two reasons. It brings about the disapproval of others, and it necessitates change, which we touched on previously. And yet, if I'm codependent and trying to avoid the disapproval of others like the plague, I will be terrified of my anger. I will be panicked. I will be petrified of my anger. And I will do what I can to block or invalidate it. I will doubt myself. I will question myself. I will doubt whether expressing it will be helpful, right? What good will it do? I don't know. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. These thoughts and questions are excellent ways, Dr. Lerner says, of silencing ourselves and shutting off our anger. Let's reflect on these themes, these observations via an anecdote from my own life. A snapshot, one incidence of anger and an incidence of rage connected. The year was, I believe it was 2011, maybe 2012. It was sometime in the winter. I can't remember if it was like November or February, but it was cold. And back then, this was when I was listening to Born This Way by Lady Gaga, and Adele was newly famous, and I was listening to them all the time. I was living in Santa Barbara, done with undergrad. I was working, I was attending night classes and going to therapy, out of a toxic codependent relationship. I don't think I'd started the next one. So, I was doing okay. My father called me and said, Marissa, I'd like you to take Samantha, Jean, and their two friends to Las Vegas. Samantha and Jean are pseudonyms, just a heads up. He continued, they'd really like to experience the city. You can take the van. I will pay for gas. And I believe my dad also offered to give me some spending money. I'm not sure if I paid for my own room, but nonetheless, a lot of my expenses would be covered. And that was his ask. Some context. I believe it was 5-ish years prior, that 2006, 2007, when my father began to volunteer as a host for international students coming to the nearby colleges. He and my mom had an empty nest, so he opened his doors to these foreigners. Without me and my sisters living at my parents' home, they had 3 extra bedrooms. So I sense my dad figured he could put them to good use and also help these students when they arrived in America. The hosting program itself was short term. Okay. The student would arrive in the US a few weeks before school started, sometime in August or September, and the host families, like my dad, or host parent, they were expected to provide housing, food, and assistance with tasks like taking these study abroad students to the bank, to Target, to buy dorm supplies, and help them become familiar with the nearby community. That was the program. And after those few weeks, the students would move into the dorms and study for, I believe it was at least a semester, if not a whole year. That was the program. However, my dad sensed it was best to become very involved in these students' lives. Over those years, those 4 or 5 years prior to this ask, the students, at times, one of them would join us for Thanksgiving, or he made it a routine where he would get lunch with them every week, and he'd take them camping. And so over the years, we'd had multiple students. So I can't remember the order, but maybe the first year we had a girl from Britain and a girl from Spain. And then he maintained contact with them throughout the school year. And then the next year, I think we had very much the same, a girl from England and a girl from Spain. And the next year, maybe a girl from Ecuador and a girl from Spain. And the year after, a girl from England, and you get the picture. So usually 2 students, and he would stay connected with them. And I will admit that throughout those years and beyond, both then and now, I consciously and unconsciously have envied how thoughtful, aware, and creative he has been with them. Yes, he was and has been thoughtful and aware and creative with me growing up, but sometimes it was really on another level. Cut to me being called and asked, please take Samantha, Jean, and their 2 friends to Las Vegas. My 4 years at college were never met with a call from him saying, hey, I'll lend you the van, take my credit card for gas, and take you and 4 friends to Vegas or anywhere. And you may imagine that a mostly expenses paid trip with 4 20-something foreign girls would sound fun to me at 22. However, after graduating, I'd basically resigned from partying. I was attending group meditations and 12-step meetings to improve my life. And I was even teased as Sister Mari by my coworkers, since I lived such a quiet and quaint and holy life back then. Not being truly aware of and also ignoring myself and where I was at in life and how I wanted to spend my time, I agreed to take these girls to Vegas. Did I really want to go to Vegas? No. Was I fond of any of these girls? Not really. Was drinking alcohol, staying out late, and probably making out with a boy of interest to me? No. But did the codependent part of me, who has and did prioritize my dad's thoughts, feelings, and needs above my own in an unconscious attempt to fulfill my own feelings, wants, and needs. Sense that I needed to say yes because, like I said earlier, and like Dr. Lerner has observed, I hold relationships in place as if my life depends on it. So, picked up these 4. I had my dad's credit card in hand, and we went to Vegas. I believe we stayed for 2 nights, and overall, it was pretty lame. I remember it was cold the whole time. I recall we went to Tao nightclub, and we weren't there for that long, and they all wanted to leave pretty early. I remember thinking, like, you girls are European. I thought we'd be out, like, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5, but no. And I maybe did make out with a guy, but I can't remember if it was that trip or another Vegas trip, because I did go to Vegas a lot during college. Not a lot, but a couple times. Overall, it was boring, dull, lame, a waste, disappointed, disconnected. And it was all for my dad. I drove there for my dad. I hosted these 4 girls for my dad. I got dressed up and wore heels all over Vegas for my dad. I went out with these 4 girls for my dad, for my dad, for my dad, for my dad, who wasn't even there. He was not there, but that does not matter to a codependent. We hit the road on Sunday, and the seething resentment that I had about the trip, and also I sense towards my dad for his relationships with these young women, started to bubble up. I think the girls were annoying me. I don't know, maybe what they wanted to listen to or what they were talking about. And like, they just like thought the desert was like so pretty. And I was like, it's okay, it's a desert. But I've also grew up around it. Just like, okay. Judgy wudgy. And my dad, he called me multiple times on our drive home to ask, have you gone to Del Taco? Make sure you take the girls to Del Taco. Don't forget to stop at Del Taco. I can't wait to hear what the girls think about Del Taco. Have you made it till Del Taco? And I was like, Dad, stop asking if I'm going to take the girls to Del Taco. So I think I snapped at him on at least 1 or 2 of those calls. And I remember I also snapped at him when I was standing at the pump trying to put more gas in, and I couldn't figure out his credit card. I called him and it's not being helpful. And I remember I'm yelling, I'm talking down to him, and I probably hung up on him too, since he was not being helpful. And all the while, these 4 girls were in the van while I'm yelling at him. And I'm sure it was awkward for them. I'm sure it was uncomfortable for them. I'm sure they were like, oh dear, like, what's wrong with Marissa? But I didn't care. I didn't want to be there. I just want to be home. I wasn't connecting with them. This is not my idea. I'm just doing this for my dad. He's not being helpful right now. All he needs to do is be helpful because I've been so helpful. Damn it. And I remember we went to Del Taco. I'm sure they thought it was delicious, but it did not require that much attention from him. And when we got home, he did confront me. He said, Marissa, it really hurt my feelings when you talk to me like that. Don't do that in front of those girls. Don't talk to me like that. Okay, sweetie? I was like, okay, Dad. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I felt awful. I felt bad for yelling at him. I felt humiliated for getting angry at him in front of the girls. I felt like it was all my fault. And I sincerely apologized to him. Okay. So here I am, right? What Dr. Lerner talks about. I discouraged myself from the awareness and forthright expression of my anger. And I was met with hurt on my dad's end, which I understand why he's hurt. Nothing was changed or addressed. So I did stay in place in my connection with these girls, even though I was not interested in having one with them. And I continued to get invites or asks or favors from my dad to help them with things, which I obliged. And I feared my anger. That it did bring about the disapproval of my dad. And there was something that needed to be changed, and yet I was not asking that. I was asking, like, why did I act like this? Not what's going on underneath. Fast forward, we must have hung out again, maybe a month or two later with these girls. Samantha, Jean, their friends. And right, my dad, these girls, and me. My mom was there, but she never really had a connection with any of them either. Like, he was making the plans. He was getting lunch with them. He was calling me to take them to Vegas. Like, my mom was not. She was just peripheral. So spending time with these girls, my dad and me, they came over, I think, to like make crepes or something. And later on in the afternoon, I walked by my dad in the kitchen, and he said to me, you know, Marissa, Jean told me that we were all together, that you seemed distant. And I was like, distant? And the seething codependent rage was set the fuck off. Distant? I'm distant? And I proceeded to lash out at my dad and these girls who were not present, but I was just lashing out at all of them. And I was like, well, maybe it's because I don't like these girls. That's why I'm distant. And why do I need to be close to them? Why are you even close to them? Why don't you get some male friends your own age rather than hang out with these 20-something female foreign exchange students all the time? And maybe some expletives. likely some other questions, and then fire metaphorically came out of my mouth. Just, how dare she say I'm distant? How dare you somewhat agree with her by conveying that observation to me? If you didn't think I was distant, you would have just been like, oh no, Jean, Marissa's not distant. She's just very attentive. Or, I wonder what to make of that. Marissa's lack of engagement with these girls. So, thankfully, my dad stood there listening. He did not argue back. He did not defend himself. He did not dismiss or condemn me. He listened until I basically just turned on my heels and stomped away. I cannot remember consciously, but I'm sure that due to the intense guilt and shame and embarrassment I felt for raging at him like that, I apologized and took full responsibility. Might have been that evening, maybe the next day, a day or two later. But I am sure I questioned my sanity and thought I was acting like a crazy person. I likely asked, what the fuck is wrong with me and going on in my life outside of this, that I'm yelling at my dad like that, not sensing there's a real connection. I invalidated, dismissed, and condemned my anger. Why did I do that? What was the point of that? Is my dad so mad at me now? Does he think I am this out of control, crazy, angry, sensitive woman? Like he sometimes suggested my mom is when she's angry? We cannot do that, Marissa. We cannot do that. We cannot have that. His needs, his thoughts, his feelings need to be prioritized so you can get your needs, thoughts, and feelings met. You cannot have that. And it took me a while to see what was going on underneath, to be curious about it and wonder, what's going on? In her book, and I will say, I really beat myself up for that. Thinking I was toxic, out of control, selfish, ungrateful. What else? Yeah, just a lot of shame. Embarrassment. And really perceiving myself as a perpetrator and my dad being the poor victim. I sensed for years when I reflected on that episode, that outburst, all I felt was judgment. Right? Never paying attention to, like, what's going on? In her book, Dr. Lerner encourages the reader to question the questions we have about our anger. She writes that anger is something we feel. It exists for a reason and always deserves our respect and attention. We all have a right to everything we feel, and certainly our anger is no exception. Thank you, Dr. Lerner. In her book, she also has 7 questions about anger that, unlike the ones we tend to ask ourselves in condemnation, these are helpful to ask. I'm going to read through all 7. I will include them in the show notes and also include them in this week's email. If you guys haven't signed up for the newsletter, there's a link in the show notes for that too. So hop on it. And then I'm going to answer them in the frame of mind that I was in after this rage episode towards my dad. 7 questions. What am I really angry about? What is the problem, and whose problem is it? How can I sort out what is responsible for that? Who is responsible for that? How can I sort out who is responsible for that? How can I learn to express my anger in a way that will not leave me feeling helpless and powerless? When I'm angry, how can I clearly communicate my position without becoming defensive or attacking? What risks and losses might I face if I become clearer and more assertive? And last, if getting angry is not working for me, what can I do differently? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes. And with this anecdote in mind, sitting with myself, like 12 years ago, and saying, Marissa, what are you really angry about? Oh man. I'm really angry that my dad wants me to have a relationship with these girls. I'm angry that he has such a close relationship with these girls. I'm angry that they refer to him as dad in their dialects, because he puts so much effort towards them. And I'm angry that he shared what Jean observed when I hadn't asked him, what does Jean think of me? And if he thought I was being distant, I'd prefer that he sit me down and ask, hey, how did you feel when we were hanging out with those girls today? I don't know if I would have said it, but being told by him, she's perceiving me as distant. I sense he's conveying that he thinks I'm being distant too. And I didn't appreciate being told how I seem rather than being asked how I feel. So, Marissa, what is the problem and whose problem is it? Well, the problem is I don't know how to say no to my dad and his interests. They'd really like to go to Vegas, sweetie. The problem is that my dad has a lot of young female friends. And I'm envious, jealous of his connections with them. The problem is, I believe that my sacrifice and help will earn me favors rather than judgment. And when I received the latter from him, I got angry. And technically, if the problem is that I'm distant, that's Jean's problem. And whether I'm connecting with these girls or not, and my dad prefers I'm more connected, that's his problem. I don't want to have a relationship with them. How can I sort out who is responsible for that? And for that, Dr. Lerner means the problems. So I am responsible for agreeing, and my dad is overall responsible for his relationships with these girls and whether or not they go to Vegas. And I'm responsible for learning how to say no to my dad. How can I learn to express my anger in a way that will not leave me feeling helpless and powerless? I can write a letter sharing with my dad what my experience in Vegas was like, what my experience is like when we hang out with these girls, what it's been like these past 5 years. At the time, it was 5 years, and express my unease about how much he invests in these relationships and how I want him to invest more in our relationship. When I'm angry, how can I clearly communicate my position without being defensive or attacking? I'd write a letter and approach my dad saying, hey, I reflected after I lashed out at you. I do have some feelings and concerns that I need to share with you. Can we schedule a time for me to read this letter to you? For me, I'm just sharing with you, this method of letter writing has worked and works since, despite the courage I've developed in confronting others and facing conflict, I'm still terrified and I feel protected by that piece of paper. I know the exact words I've written down are being expressed. And I have some awareness that at least while I'm reading, the floor is mine, right? I'm like dear dad. And I know that the suggestion, like what is mandated, hopefully, it's not guaranteed, but if and when you do write letters like this, you're basically saying like, okay, from start to finish, I'm going to read this and then we can talk about it. What risks and losses might I face if I become clearer and more assertive? So if I say no to my dad to spending time with these girls or taking them to Vegas, he would be disappointed. That is a risk and a loss that I would face. And my dad, he does this thing where he goes, the sound that he makes when he's disappointed, or I don't know, something doesn't work out, or someone misses a flight. It's like, and disappointing him, it's the worst. Evidently, it's worse than driving all the way to Vegas and attending meals and getting to know these girls I have no interest in. So I'd risk disappointing him and maybe some distance, maybe some distance, maybe some hurt feelings on his part, and then withdrawing from me for a little bit or just slightly less, fewer calls. And then I'd be hurt when I made aware that he's spending time with them and not me. And I'd likely experience doubt for the near future, wondering if I'm being too dramatic, possessive, controlling, or overbearing. Those are the things I label myself so I can stay in place. And lastly, if getting angry is not working for me, what can I do differently? I can say no to hanging out with these girls, especially having them to visit in Santa Barbara, which I did, taking them to Vegas. Yeah, do differently. Just say no to what is misaligned with who I am, where I'm at, and what I want at this time. So that's what Marissa circa 2011, 2012 likely would have come up with. I don't know if I was that conscious of what was going on, but I'd aim for that. I hope you do too. Yeah. Lots of feelings. And lots of experiences in this context with these students and with my dad. And it just all came up during the Vegas trip, right, heading back. And then definitely just the volcano erupted when he shared that I was being distant. So I'm curious what your rage and anger has looked like and how you can use these questions to practice compassion and tenderness and see this anger as a language that you're not fluent in. So you're trying to decipher, create some meaning. I will say it has gotten better over the years with these students, these girls. I don't maintain contact with any of them. We went to like a wedding for one of them. I'm not close to her, but my twin sister has stayed in touch with her. I had to go on a camping trip. I believe I've mentioned that before. So my mom, dad,
And one of the girls that year, she was from Spain, they were supposed to go camping. My mom, I don't know, I think they got in a fight. She was like, I'm not going to go camping. And my dad called me and he's like, Marissa, you have to go camping. Because I think he said like it'll be awkward or uncomfortable. It was just she and I. And by awkward and uncomfortable, I sensed like, yeah, that would be awkward and uncomfortable and inappropriate and creepy. So I'll come. And yeah, so but overall, I don't have relationships with them. I don't feel obligated if and when they are visiting the States, or I don't know, he goes to visit one of them. No, like I'm not participating. Yeah, that's aligned with who I am and where I'm at and what I value. So to conclude, anger is a signal and one worth listening to. As Dr. Lerner discusses, women have long been discouraged from awareness and forthright expression of our anger. We repress and suppress our anger, so things stay in place, relationships stay in place. And we fear our anger because it brings about the disapproval in others and it necessitates change. Let's challenge these norms by being curious about our anger. Like I said, please use the 7 questions we have discussed in this episode to reflect on a rage outburst from before, or if something comes up this week. Be willing to split it open. And that is a wrap on episode 88. Please rate, review, subscribe, and share this podcast. We need more ratings on Spotify. Thank you in advance. And if you're needing more than just these episodes to combat your codependency, some options, you can get your copy of the Confiding Codependent 30 Days of Journaling Prompts for a less codependent and more conscious you. That's at codependent.com/tools for healing. You can download the Self-Validation Challenge. It's a free 30-day guide to providing yourself with all the validation you seek, including with your anger. If you're wanting to dive deeper into your codependency one-on-one, I can offer that. Please email Marissa at codependent.com. And lastly, there is a link in the show notes to support the show via a one-time donation via PayPal. I've been announcing this for a while and nobody's donated, which is totally fine. But part of me is like, is it broken? Is it not working? So if you're willing to donate $5 as a test, I would really appreciate that. And I will see you all next week. Take care.
Hey girl, it's Marissa again. I'm not like a regular podcaster, I'm a cool podcaster, right? Thank you for listening and staying till the end. You can find me on Instagram at Therapy with Marissa. Email me, Marissa at codependent.com. Check out codependent.com for more information on the show. And baby girl, a subscribe, rating, and review would be much appreciated. Till next time, I want you to remember, if you are feeling unseen, I see you. If you are feeling unheard, I hear you. And if you think that you don't matter, know that you matter to me. I want you to go out there so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. And now, the disclaimer. Girl, this is not therapy and I am not your therapist. This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, or guests are rendering any legal, clinical, or other professional service. If you want or need a professional, please find one.